The wealthy rancher, Mae Calder, steadied her rifle, the iron sights locked squarely on the Apache trespasser below. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Get off my land," she growled, "or you die." Then a frail cry rose from the ravine, thin, broken, unmistakably human. What Mae saw in the man's arms froze her where she stood, striking with a force she had not felt in decades. In that suspended breath, everything she believed shifted. Stories across the territory painted Mae Calder as unflinching a woman who could stare down a charging bull or a defiant hired hand with the same cold resolve. Her eyes hardened against sun, and dust missed nothing. Her word was law, carried not by shouting, but by an iron silence. Iron Peak was more than land. It was her armor. Built through ruthless labor and years of loss, the ranch was an extension of her spine. A shield against memory, against a world that had already taken her children and demanded more. That morning, Hank Dorsey, her foreman, had ridden in, pale and tight-throated. "There's someone up north," he whispered, "camping near the ravines. Apache." The word alone burned. Water was scarce their sacred. This was not trespass. It was defiance. To Mae, the wilderness was never neutral. It tested it, stole it, killed. Anyone bold enough to claim part of it, especially an outsider, was robbing her of peace. She saddled up without hesitation. A Winchester rode across her back, its weight familiar comforting. The sun hammered the land into a wavering blur as she pushed her horse hard. In her mind, the verdict was already passed. An Apache on her land meant violence, theft, blood. Each pounding hoofbeat reinforced the old law of the West: ownership belonged to those willing to pull the trigger. At the edge of the ravine, Mae slid from the saddle with practiced silence. Below, beneath a jagged rock shelf, sat the intruder. Broad-backed. Apache. Early 30s, maybe. His shoulders were hunched, his focus fixed on something in his hands. Plunder, she assumed. Or a weapon. She lifted the rifle. The sights settled between his shoulders. She was ready to command him gone or end it if he so much as twitched. Then the cry cut through everything. Not a shout, not steel. A thin, breaking wail that ripped straight through her resolve. Mae's rifle dipped without her willing it. Her breath snagged. For one impossible second, the world tipped. The sound was wrong, too fragile for violence. Too alive. Her grip slackened as disbelief collided with the instinct. That wasn't the wind. That was a baby. The man below shifted not in alarm, but with deliberate care. He turned just enough for her to see what he cradled. Not a sack, not a blade, but a swaddled bundle pressed to his chest. In Tarek's sun-darkened arms lay a newborn, impossibly small, pale beneath dust and heat. Life clung to it by a thread, defying the vast, merciless land around them. Shock crashed over Mae, drowning anger and suspicion alike. Nothing in her years of survival had prepared her for this. The scene burned itself into her bones. Tarek's lips were cracked with thirst. Exhaustion lined his face. Yet he tipped his nearly empty canteen, wetting a fingertip with its last drops, touching it gently to the baby's mouth. The care in his movements was reverent, sacred. He rocked slightly, a low, ancient lullaby vibrating from his chest. Words Mae didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. The baby's whimper softened. This man was starving so the child could live. Mae's heart splintered. This was not a savage, not a thief. This was a guardian. The rifle slipped from her hands and landed in the dust. The woman who had ridden out ready to kill was gone. In her place stood someone undone, staring at a warrior holding life together with nothing but will. And for the first time in years, Mae Calder felt something crack open where grief had lived. It was a song meant to shield life, a chant of endurance, carried into a land that offered none. Tarek gave away what little remained of himself, his strength, his breath, the last mercy of water, to keep alive a child who, by the cruel math of bloodlines and conquest, should have been his enemy. Every hardened instinct inside Mae Calder, sharpened by grief and years of loss, recoiled at the sight, then split apart. This was not a savage, not a thief, not the monster her fear had shaped across decades. This was a protector, a man pouring his own fading existence into a helpless life. The image struck Mae like a blade twisting through wounds she had never allowed to heal. Memories surged, small hands once wrapped around her fingers. Laughter swallowed by sickness, the hollow silence left behind by the lost Calder children. The world she had built, ruled by self-reliance, suspicion, and unforgiving judgment, began to collapse. The sharp borders she trusted, settler and native, enemy and kin, civilized and wild, blurred until they meant nothing at all. She no longer saw a trespasser to drive away. She saw a man burdened by the same universal weight she once carried, the duty to protect life at any cost. The raw humanity of his choice pierced the armor she had worn for so long, an armor forged in mourning and solitude, hardened by survival. Under the merciless sun, that armor softened, melted. Her Winchester slipped from numb fingers and struck the dust with a dull thud. The steel that once defined her authority now felt like a path she could no longer walk. The woman who had ridden down with death in her heart no longer existed. Something else stood in her place. She did not see an intruder. She saw a guardian, someone clinging to life itself against impossible odds. Mae descended the slope slowly, not with the taut precision of a hunter, but with uncertain steps pulled forward by something she could not resist. The arms once raised to kill now reached out, tentative and open, a silent plea rather than a command. Tears, rare as rain in the desert, cut clean lines down her weathered face. Each one carried years of buried sorrow drawn out by the fragile innocence before her. Tarek, his dark eyes lifting to her face, read the shift without words. The danger had passed. He remained still, body angled protectively around the child, yet no longer braced for violence. He watched her approach, allowing her to witness the quiet miracle taking place in the dust. The woman known across the valley for unbreakable resolve sank to her knees before him, undone by the soft cry of a newborn. In that instant, old hatred dissolved into heat and wind. An unseen line was crossed as Mae Calder stepped out of the fortress she had lived inside and into something unknown, shared vulnerability, shared mercy. Her knees pressed into the desert earth as her gaze locked onto the tiny face cradled in Tarek's arms. The infant Lila stirred weakly, a faint sound escaping her dry lips. The sound bypassed reason and struck straight into the hollow place Mae carried, where her children's voices once lived. The sight of Tarek's exhausted face, his unyielding devotion to that fragile life, shattered what remained of her defenses. She was no longer a landowner guarding borders. She was a woman laid bare by compassion. Her hand reached forward, trembling, not toward the warrior, but toward the child. Tarek did not move. He neither retreated nor relaxed his hold, drawing Lila just slightly closer, a silent question in his eyes. Mae understood at once. Trust, she knew, was earned grain by grain, especially between worlds like theirs. But the child's need outweighed every hesitation she had left. Water Mae rasped, her voice raw. I have more. Food. Medicine. She gestured toward her horse, still heavy with supplies meant for her own return. An offering made without calculation. Tarek's eyes followed her hand, then returned to her face. Something flickered there, relief perhaps, or recognition. He said nothing. His history demanded caution, but a single nod sealed it. Slowly Mae retrieved her fuller canteen, a small pouch of dried meat, hardtack. She set them on the ground between them, not forcing them into his hands, not taking, giving. The understanding between them settled into the air, quiet and unspoken. She was offering help, not trespass. Tarek carefully peeled back a corner of the dried meat, softening a sliver between his lips before easing it gently against the baby's mouth. Every movement spoke of desperate ingenuity of love sharpened by survival. Mae Calder watched a deep ache tightening her chest. She remembered her own children, their small mouths searching for food, the trust in their eyes. As Lila's cries faded into weak rhythmic suckling, something fragile formed between the two strangers. Tarek, his guard, easing inch by inch, finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, each word measured. He told her of a settler caravan, now known only as the Dry Mesa family, lost weeks earlier. A sudden sandstorm had swallowed them, whole erasing tracks, crushing hope. When he found them, there was nothing left but silence and ruin. Only the baby had survived, clinging to breath amid the wreckage. He had carried her for days, shared the last of his water, split what little food he had. Each mile drained his strength further. There was no nearby tribe, no shelter, no safety, only the endless desert. He was heading north, chasing the slim chance of a distant trading post, a journey nearly impossible for one man and a newborn. He spoke of the child's mother, found lifeless with a silver locket clenched in her hand. Its engraved pattern hinted at love at a life cut short. Mae listened, pain echoing deep in her chest. The story mirrored the West she knew, indifferent, brutal, unforgiving. The same force that had taken the lost Calder children. Her gaze drifted to the locket he described, now tucked into Lila's wrappings, catching the light. Oval, silver, etched with delicate vines. A memory stirred, faint, unsettling. Mae brushed it aside. Grief played tricks. Yet something deeper pulled at her. Tarek described the mother further, hair the color of sunrise and a small star-shaped birthmark on her left wrist. Mae inhaled sharply. The details struck too close. Her thoughts raced backward to a time before loss hardened her. She remembered Evelyn Calder, her younger sister, restless, bright, drawn to adventure, and a charming traveling merchant. Evelyn's auburn hair, her fierce laugh, and that star-shaped mark. A sound escaped Mae's throat, half breath, half shock. The child in Tarek's arms was her niece. The realization hit like a blow. The baby she had nearly condemned, saved by the man she had ridden out to kill, was her blood. The world tilted again, spinning under the weight of cruel irony. Family had been returned to her by the very hand she had raised a weapon against. Her eyes met Tarek's. He saw the change instantly. He understood he had delivered more than a child. He had brought her past her present and a future she had never dared imagine. Mae stared at Lila, then at Tarek, stunned. The air between them thickened with unspoken truth. The child needed safety, care, a life. And Mae knew without doubt that life belonged at Iron Peak. But where did this man fit within her fractured world? What cost would come with this miracle? The desert wind whispered no answers. The ride back to Iron Peak was quiet, though the miles were long. Purpose bound them more tightly than words. Mae rode ahead, urgency softening her usual steel resolve. She glanced back often. Tarek followed steadily. Lila held close. The sun, once merciless, felt like a guide, now its warmth a blessing. Mae found herself pointing out trails and landmarks, explaining the land. An uneasy companionship took root, born of survival and fate. When they reached the ranch, the sight of Mae returning with an Apache warrior and a swaddled infant rippled through the Iron Peak men. Faces hardened. Hands drifted toward guns. Fear and suspicion spread quickly. Mae dismounted, her voice tight but commanding. "This man saved my niece," she said. "He's under my protection. Any man who doesn't like it can ride out now." Silence fell. The challenge held. The unrest eased, the wary eyes stayed fixed on Tarek. The days that followed were a careful truce. Accustomed to isolation and unquestioned command, Mae Calder now found herself adjusting to a rhythm she had never known. The baby, whom Mae named Lila after her lost sister, Evelyn Calder, required constant care, disrupting the rigid order Iron Peak had long followed. Tarek, watchful and reserved, spoke little, yet his presence became a steady anchor amid the flood of unfamiliar emotions. He helped Mae prepare a crude nursery shaping a solid cradle from salvaged boards, his hands careful, his attention never straying far from the child. Mae, surprised by instincts she believed long buried, spent hours rocking Lila, murmuring lullabies she hadn't sung since the days of the lost Calder children. Still, Lila often remained restless, unsettled by new surroundings. It was Tarek who could quiet her. He hummed the same low rhythmic songs he had sung in the ravine, deep ancient tones, and the baby would relax against him, soothed by the warmth of his chest. Mae watched with conflicting emotions, gratitude, edged with something close to envy. It was plain that Tarek was more than a rescuer. He carried the calm assurance of someone meant to protect life. As days stretched into a week, Tarek began to prove his worth beyond guarding the child. He possessed an instinctive understanding of the land, its moods, its warnings. One afternoon, a critical section of the irrigation ditch gave way, threatening to dry out a newly planted field. Hank Dorsey, frustrated and short on answers, argued repairs would take days. Tarek studied the damage in silence, pacing the ditch, reading the slope. With brief gestures and quiet words in his own language, he pointed out a hidden rock seam and a subtle grade the others had missed. Following his direction, the Iron Peak men redirected the water, sealing the break with speed none expected. The channel flowed again, saving the crop. Respect, reluctant but real, began to ripple through the crew. Soon after, one of Mae's prize mares fell ill, dull-eyed, and refusing feed. The ranch vet was weeks away. Tarek observed the animal carefully, resting a hand against her flank, eyes closed in concentration. Then he rode into the hills and returned with a bundle of roots and herbs. He brewed a bitter mixture and patiently coaxed the mare to drink. Within days, she began to recover. What some dismissed as superstition proved to be knowledge, hard-earned and effective. Mae watched, astonishment giving way to admiration. Tarek was not merely enduring the frontier, he understood it. His skills, born of a life far different from hers, complemented Mae's iron discipline. His quiet competence eased burdens she hadn't realized she carried. Slowly his presence shifted from uneasy tolerance to necessity. Though still an outsider to many, he became a valued part of Iron Peak. The men began seeking him out, asking about weather signs, tracks, the land's subtle language. He answered plainly without flourish. Trust grew. Mae felt the tension ease, held together by the soft sounds of Lila's breath and cries. Then, just as balance seemed possible, trouble arrived. One evening, Mae stood on the porch and saw a lone rider approach, dark against the setting sun. Rafe Morrow, a neighboring rancher, known for land grabs and bitter prejudice, reined in his horse. His cold gaze fixed immediately on Tarek, working quietly in the corral. A sneer crossed Rafe's face as his hand drifted toward his gun. His arrival cut through the fragile calm like a blade. Whatever peace Mae had begun to build was about to be tested. Rafe dismounted with deliberate weight, his eyes never leaving Tarek. The Iron Peak men, moments earlier relaxed, stiffened. Old fear stirred beneath old bias. The air at Iron Peak turned cold. Mae Calder met him on the porch, her back straight, her face set in practiced restraint. "Rafe Morrow," she said evenly, "what brings you onto my land?" Rafe's sneer deepened. "Just riding through Mae. Heard Iron Peak's been growing. More land, more hands." His eyes slid toward Tarek, sharp with intent. "Didn't know you were hiring Apache." The word was spat like poison. Mae felt heat rise in her chest. "He works for me," she said coldly, "and under my roof he's treated with respect." Her hand drifted toward the rifle leaning by the door, no threat spoken, but clearly understood. Rafe laughed, dry and cruel. "Respect. You always were soft, Mae. Let feelings cloud your head. Just wait. He'll turn on you, steal your stock, take your scalp." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've heard stories. Raids up north, horses gone, girls missing." The implication hung heavy, drifting straight toward the listening Iron Peak men. Mae's jaw hardened. "Get off my land, Rafe. Now!" But Rafe smiled. He enjoyed this, undermining her authority, staking his own claim. His hand slid toward his gun. "Or what? You gonna have your pet, savage?" A sound tore through the air. Sheep screaming. Shouts from the far pasture. A wolf attack. Not a lone animal. Gray wolves, desperate and hungry, had broken through the fence. Men scattered, grabbing rifles as sheep bolted bleeding and panicked, their cries rolling across the valley. Mae hesitated. Only a heartbeat. Those sheep meant winter survival. She reached for her rifle. Rafe turned momentarily, distracted by the chaos. Tarek did not hesitate. Unarmed, he ran. Mae watched in stunned silence as he moved fast, fluid cutting across the land like he belonged to it. Gunfire cracked uselessly as the men's shots scattered sheep more than wolves. Tarek did not charge. He circled. He read the wind, the slope, the pack. Then he cried out, not a shout, but something deeper, primal. A sharp, piercing call that echoed across the hills, mimicking the warning voice of a greater predator. The sound unsettled the air itself. The gray wolves paused, ears lifted. Confusion rippled through the pack. Tarek moved again, positioning himself between the wolves and the sheep, guiding the terrified animals with precise steps, steering them toward the broken fence and safety beyond. He became a moving wall, calm and controlled. The wolves hesitated. Their hunt faltered. With one final cry, low commanding final, the lead wolf growled and turned back into the brush. The rest followed. Silence fell. The sheep were scattered but alive. The Iron Peak. Men stood, frozen rifles lowered, staring first at the retreating wolves, then at Tarek, who walked back toward them, chest rising and falling, sweat streaking his face unharmed. He hadn't fired a single shot. Mae's heart hammered as pride surged through her. Tarek hadn't just saved her livestock. He had proven his worth beyond dispute. Not with words, not with force, with mastery of the land itself. He was no longer just an outsider. He belonged at Iron Peak. Rafe Morrow saw something else entirely. The color drained from his face. Fear flickered beneath his fury. What he had witnessed shattered his certainty. His prejudice cracking under the weight of something he could neither command nor control. This was no savage. This was a force of nature. And for the first time, the ground beneath Rafe Morrow's boots felt unsteady. He had arrived to intimidate, to belittle, to assert dominance, and instead, he had witnessed a quiet act of courage that stripped his bluster bare. The Iron Peak men looked at Tarek differently now. What had once been suspicion settled into an unspoken recognition of skill. As Tarek passed Rafe Morrow, his gaze steady and unflinching, Rafe faltered, stumbling back a step, shaken. He had come to stir hatred. Instead, Tarek's actions had drawn Mae's people closer to him. Mae Calder stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Tarek's shoulder, an unmistakable sign of allegiance. "I believe you were saying something about savages, Rafe." Her voice cut cold and clean. Rafe had no answer. His jaw tightened, his hands trembling slightly as humiliation burned through him. The danger had passed, but the silence that followed was heavy, thick with unresolved tension. The ranch hand saw Tarek anew, but Rafe's fury only deepened. Mae knew better than to mistake this moment for victory. Rafe's fear mixed with wounded pride was far more dangerous than open hostility. He would remember this. Lines had been drawn deeper and wider than before. In the weeks after Rafe Morrow's bitter departure, an uneasy calm settled over Iron Peak. Tarek's stand against the gray wolves had done more than save livestock. It had changed the air itself. The men remained rough and guarded, but now they nodded when he passed. Sometimes they offered a word, even a short laugh. In their world, that meant everything. The invisible walls between them, began to erode. Mae observed the shift with quiet satisfaction. Tarek remained unchanged, reserved, composed, untouched by praise. He worked as he always had, tending horses, mending irrigation, moving through the land with purpose. Most of all, he shared in caring for Lila. In those moments, Mae saw him clearly, not as a warrior, not as an Apache, but as a man defined by compassion. Lila thrived. Her cries grew strong. Her small hands reached with intention. Her eyes, bright as a summer sky, followed Tarek wherever he moved. He showed Mae how to read the smallest signs of hunger or discomfort, sharing old remedies that soothed Lila better than any store-bought cure. In return, Mae found herself speaking of her own past stories, long buried beneath grief and isolation. She spoke of Mae Calder with tender longing, a restless spirit, a woman too alive to be contained by ranch fences. Tarek listened without interruption, understanding the weight of those memories, knowing they were a gift. One evening, as the sun slipped below the hills in streaks of amber and violet, Mae found Tarek seated on the porch, Lila asleep against his chest. He hummed a low, ancient melody, its rhythm weaving gently through the cooling air. Mae sat beside him. The silence between them felt natural now, shared, grounded. "She reminds me of my sister," Mae murmured. "Always reaching, always wanting more." She paused. "I tried to keep her here. Thought I could protect her from the world." Tarek looked toward the horizon. "To grow," he said quietly. "A bird must leave the nest." Mae nodded, tears slipping free. I blamed myself for letting her go, for not stopping her. And now, finding her child like this. Her voice broke. Tarek rocked Lila gently. "The river always finds the sea," he said, "even when the path is long. Your lives were never separate. You and this child were meant to meet again." His words struck Mae deeply. She had always seen her life as a chain of losses, disconnected tragedies. But Tarek spoke of something larger. Cycles, purpose, threads woven long before any of them understood. Evelyn's restless spirit, Tarek's desperate journey, Lila's survival, the locket, the mark, all part of a design unseen yet undeniable. She had believed herself alone, a solitary watchkeeper guarding old wounds. Yet she was part of something far older, an intricate pattern of loss and rescue, of separation and return. Their lives had been threaded together long before they met, bound by blood chance and a stubborn human will to endure. That realization deepened the bond between Mae Calder and Tarek. They were no longer strangers brought together by circumstance, but partners, bound by a shared fate, united by the small, innocent life sleeping peacefully between them. Iron Peak, once a fortress built to keep the world out, slowly began to feel like a home again, still echoing with the past, yet alive with promise. The next morning dawned calm and clear. The sky stretched wide and blue sagebrush scented the air and coffee steamed in the kitchen. Mae prepared breakfast while Tarek worked outside, resetting a fence post loosened by the night wind. Lila slept in her cradle, sunlight warming her face. For the first time in decades, Mae felt something close to peace. Then the ground spoke. A low rumble rolled across the plains, not thunder, not wagons, but a steady pounding that grew louder by the second. Dust carried on the wind, many hooves. Tarek froze, his head lifted, his eyes locked on the horizon. He dropped his tools, his expression tightening. Mae rushed to the window. A dark cloud of dust advanced fast, swallowing the land beneath it. There was no mistaking it now, a posse riding hard, riding angry. The fragile calm shattered. Rafe Morrow had returned, and he hadn't come alone. The dust cloud rose like a warning drawn across the morning sky. Mae's peace evaporated, replaced by familiar fear and a fierce protective resolve. She knew that sound. A posse moved with one purpose only. Tarek met her gaze. They're coming for me, he said quietly, acceptance steady in his voice. Mae shook her head. They're coming for my land, for what they think is theirs, and for what they think is yours. She reached for her Winchester. The weight settled into her hands like truth. Everything forged between them, trust, loyalty, belonging, would now be tested. There would be no retreat. The posse thundered into the yard. Rafe Morrow, mounted on a powerful sorrel, hauled his horse to a stop, dust boiling around him. His grin was sharp, triumphant. Behind him rode a dozen armed men, his own hands and bitter neighbors, forming a hard semicircle. Rifles rested ready. Eyes gleamed with judgment and hunger. Mae Calder. Rafe shouted. I warned you, he pointed toward Tarek. Words out. Apache raiders north of here. Horses gone. A settler family hit the Dry Mesa family. That man's the cause. Tarek stood unmoving beside Mae. He saved my niece, Mae shot back. He is no raider. He's a good man, Rafe spat. There's no good in his kind. String him up. Make an example. Murmurs rippled through the posse. A few rifles lifted. Then Mae's men moved. The Iron Peak men stepped forward, forming a line beside Tarek. Rifles raised. Backs straight. A silent declaration of loyalty earned. The ground itself seemed to hold its breath. You're making a mistake, Rafe Mae shouted, finger tight on the trigger. This isn't just about him. It's about what kind of West we're building. But reason no longer reached Rafe Morrow. Humiliation from the wolf incident had rotted into obsession. Tarek's presence was an insult he could not endure, a challenge to his authority, to his belief that fear ruled this land. And now, with guns drawn and dust choking the air, that belief was about to be tested. What's right, Rafe Morrow snarled, is putting him down before he burns this whole valley. Before the words could settle, a rider burst from the rear of Rafe's posse, spurring his horse forward in a reckless rush. The young man's face was pale, eyes wide with panic. It was Eli Morrow, Rafe's youngest son, usually quiet, usually afraid to speak. Father. No, it's not him, Eli shouted, hauling his horse to a skidding stop. The raiders hit our north pasture last night. Rafe spun on him. What are you saying? We found the tracks, Eli cried. They weren't Apache. They were white men, wearing stolen tribal clothes. They attacked the settlers, too, the Dry Mesa family, not Tarek. A stunned silence swallowed the ranch yard. Rifles lowered. Men exchanged uncertain glances. The certainty that had fueled their anger cracked. Rafe rounded on his son, disbelief burning hot. You lying to me, boy, protecting that savage. No, father, Eli insisted, tears streaking his face. I saw their boots, their faces. They tried to hide who they were, but I know. They stole our cattle too, not just the horses. The truth hung heavy, collapsing the story Rafe had built his vengeance upon. The enemy he had named the Apache, Tarek, was not the source of the violence. The real threat had worn white faces and used hatred as cover. Rafe's men began to realize they had been played. Shame flickered across their expressions as they looked at him, then at Tarek. But Rafe would not yield. His eyes burned with cornered rage, darting between his son and Tarek. Lies, he spat. Both of you. Some trick. Some kind of Indian devilry. He drew his pistol arm, shaking reason, drowned by fury. Mae saw it instantly, the wildness, the danger. Stop, Rafe. Think about your son, but he was beyond hearing. The gun fired. The shot wasn't meant for Mae. Tarek moved on instinct. He shoved Mae hard aside as the bullet tore into his shoulder. He hit the ground with a sharp grunt, blood blooming dark against his buckskin. The standoff shattered. The Iron Peak men raised their rifles in one motion, sights locked on Rafe. Eli lunged at his father, grabbing for the gun, horror etched across his face. Mae dropped to her knees beside Tarek, pressing her hands to the wound, her fingers slick with blood. Her rescuer, her ally, The man who had protected her family now lay bleeding because of her land. But even as chaos raged, Mae noticed something else. Two of Rafe's most loyal riders quietly turned their horses. Without a word, they spurred hard, vanishing into the open country. They were gone before anyone could stop them. The immediate threat was broken, but not finished. Tarek had paid the price, and while the main predator was trapped, others had slipped away into the wild. Mae felt the truth settle cold in her bones. This was far from over. As she bound Tarek's shoulder with shaking hands, the Iron Peak men disarmed Rafe. Stripped of his weapon, he stood trembling, fear and realization finally overtaking him. Eli clung to his father, sobbing, his earlier courage collapsing into desperate grief. The posse watched in uneasy silence. Eli's confession had torn apart the lie. The raiders were not Apache. They were white men, exploiting fear. And that truth spoken by Rafe's own son carried undeniable weight. The injustice of Tarek's wound paired with the exposed deception turned the tide. Men who had ridden in, fueled by rumor, now felt the sting of their own blindness. Mae rose slowly, blood on her hands, her voice steady and commanding. "Rafe Morrow," she said, "you slandered an innocent man. You brought violence onto my land and shot a man who has done nothing but protect others." She let the words cut deep. "And you did it because of a lie." She gestured toward Eli. "Your son told the truth. The raiders were not Apache. They were white men hiding behind hatred. And you," her gaze locked on Rafe, "were their pawn." Rafe seemed to shrink where he stood, exposed at last. The bluster had drained from Rafe Morrow, leaving only a hollow man standing in its place. His eyes drifted to Tarek, who, pale from blood loss, returned the look without flinching. There was no hatred in Tarek's gaze, only a quiet, almost mournful understanding. That absence of anger cut deeper than any accusation. Something in Rafe fractured. He looked away, the weight of his guilt settling heavily on his shoulders. "What do we do with him?" "Mae Calder," one of her men asked, gripping Rafe's arm. The question lingered, demanding justice for Tarek's wound and the fear they had endured. Mae's eyes moved to Tarek. His silent endurance spoke louder than words. Then a thought formed, one born not of revenge, but of hard-earned wisdom. She thought of Lila, of the calm Tarek had brought into her broken life. She thought of the lies Rafe had spread, poison that fed fear and division. Banishment or a rope would not heal that damage. "Rafe Morrow," Mae said evenly, "you will make amends." Rafe lifted his head, stunned. "Your son's truth saved you from a hanging," she continued. "But you will confess your lies to every rancher in this valley. You will help us hunt down the men who truly raided our lands. And you will work to repair what you've torn apart between my people and Tarek's." Shock and relief warred in Rafe's eyes. He had expected punishment, death perhaps. This was something far heavier. "But the others," he stammered, voice raw, "the real raiders, they won't stand for it." "Then we face them together." Mae replied, her gaze sweeping across the gathered men. "All of us. And you, Rafe, will lead the way in setting this right." That was the true turning point. Rafe was not defeated by force or gunfire, but by truth spoken by Eli Morrow, a frightened boy, and by mercy that demanded accountability. Redemption, not violence, became his sentence. With Tarek's wound stabilized and a fragile alliance forming, the remaining members of Rafe's posse, now convinced of the truth, proved invaluable. They knew the canyon trails, the rumors, the habits of the Red Creek outlaws. The hunt began. Guided by Mae's resolve, Tarek's tracking skill, and Rafe's reluctant, then genuine, cooperation. The raiders' hidden camp was found days later, deep in a narrow canyon. White men, not Apache. Thieves dressed in stolen tribal clothing to mask their crimes. They were taken without further bloodshed. Stolen cattle and horses were recovered, their deception exposed for all to see. Justice slow and hard won had been served. Yet as the outlaws were led away in chains, Mae noticed something missing. 2 men were gone, the same riders who had fled the posse that morning. Her eyes met Tarek's. No words were needed. The main threat had been crushed. But something smaller, quieter, had slipped back into the wild. Peace, she knew, always demanded watchfulness. Years passed like a steady river, smoothing old wounds and nurturing a hard-earned calm. Iron Peak Ranch, once a fortress built from grief, became a place of life and shared purpose. The scars of the past remained on the land and in memory, but they were woven now into something stronger. Mae Calder, her hair threaded with silver, no longer carried bitterness like armor. Her eyes held warmth. She ruled not by fear, but by fairness no longer. Just a landowner, but a true matriarch of the valley. Tarek, his shoulder fully healed, stayed at Iron Peak. His presence became essential, steady, grounded, unyielding. The battle had ended. The work of understanding endured. He slipped into the rhythm of the ranch as if he had always belonged there. Tarek's understanding of the land, his quiet bond with animals, and his steady, measured wisdom soon became indispensable. He was no longer just working at Iron Peak. He stood beside Mae Calder as her equal, her partner, her trusted counsel, and a man the valley had come to rely on. He taught the younger Iron Peak men how to read the ground, how to follow a trail without breaking it, how to listen to the wind instead of fighting it. He showed them which desert plants healed and which ones harmed. What had once been viewed as his Apache heritage, something feared and misunderstood, became respected, even honored. It wove itself into the ranch like a vital thread that strengthened the whole. Lila, now 7 years old, was the brightest light in their world. Her hair shone like sunrise, and her blue eyes carried the fearless spark of a child raised between open skies and hard truths. She rode beside Tarek across the plains, learning the names of animals and plants, and curled beside Mae at night, listening to stories of the old frontier. She was a living bridge between worlds. Lila called Mae Grandma Mae, and she called Tarek Uncle Tarek. The words were spoken with such natural love that neither ever questioned them. They simply accepted the warmth. Rafe Morrow forever changed by his public confession, and Mae's mercy became something no one had expected. His once booming voice, previously fueled by fear and hatred, now carried a different message. He spoke openly of his own failures, warning others against prejudice, and urging cooperation instead of division. He worked tirelessly to rebuild trust across the valley. The 2 men who had escaped that day, the ones who became known as the Black Spur Riders, were eventually caught. Their schemes unraveled, piece by piece, proof that vigilance still mattered. Mae and Tarek never let the valley forget that peace had to be guarded. One cool autumn evening, Mae and Tarek sat together on the porch, watching Lila chase fireflies through the tall grass. Mae's eyes drifted to the silver locket Lila always wore, a gift she herself had given a final link to Evelyn Calder. It had been found clutched in Evelyn's hand when she died. Tarek, Mae said quietly, "You never told me something." He turned to her. "Why did you risk everything for Lila? You could have walked away. No one would have known." Tarek smiled, a rare, gentle expression, softening his face. "Her mother," he said. "She was brave. I found her in the sand, holding the child, and she had this." He reached into the small leather pouch he always carried and pulled out a faded wooden bird, carefully carved its surface, worn smooth by time. "She held this too. I knew it was meant for the child. It felt like a message." Mae took the bird, her fingers trembling as they traced its shape. Her breath caught. "I carved this," she whispered, "for my sister, years ago." Tarek nodded slowly. "I recognized the mark, and the way she held it even in death. It was a sign. She wanted the child returned to her blood." The truth settled over Mae like a quiet storm. Tarek had not found Evelyn by chance. He had been guided. What he had carried across the desert was more than a child. It was a message from a lost sister, a final plea to bind what had been broken. He had not simply saved a life. He had delivered a legacy. The journey from that first desperate moment in the desert to this peaceful evening had never been random. It was fate woven carefully through grief, courage, and mercy. The sun slipped below the horizon, long shadows stretching across Iron Peak. Mae clutched the wooden bird to her chest, a sense of closure filling the space sorrow once occupied. The desert had tested her, reshaped her, and taught her the truth she had resisted for so long. Strength was not found in walls, but in reaching across divides. Her story and Tarek's became legend in the valley. A quiet tale passed from voice to voice, a reminder that empathy could outlast hatred, that compassion could outshine fear, and that even in the harshest land, life and love would always find a way to bloom. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voice-over visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.